Okay, this is a study session that we are hosting on the Brighan server. This will be posted on YouTube, and study matter has been just voted by patrons, and we are going to talk a little bit of composition, values, color studies, and a little bit of anatomy. Those are the main concerns per se that people have been asking me about. So the first question is, I've seen lots of different approaches to adding depth value, including working with analogous colors, incorporating complementary colors for depth, etc. What kind of approach have you found works personally? So as I was saying, I find a huge amount of inspiration in sites such as ArtStation. I always say that, especially if you haven't received any sort of art education and you're, on your own, that the thing that you will be asked to do in any kind of art education program, at least in the classic part, because I had a fine arts education at first, they're going to ask you to draw a lot of the nature pieces, which can be really boring, and it's really repetitive, and it can be very messy and just not inspire you much. It's great. It's a great practice because it makes you learn about training your eye when it comes to imitating colors in real life, since you're limited to traditional, and it's a little bit easier with digital, which is my main field of expertise nowadays. So when it's about depth and value, more than in color, I tend to worry more about values first, the grayscale. And because, of course, color is a great tool when dragging attention, especially with, as you say, complementary colors. We've always seen around anywhere on the internet this piece that is green, and there is a character dressed in red, and it's the greatest example. Or it doesn't even have to be a piece that is green. Red is a really strong color. It has a huge frequency of color. It drags a lot of attention to us. So yeah, anything that color contrast is good, but most of the times you need to worry about values first. So what I usually do when I have this kind of board of inspirations, if I'm not sure how to approach my idea, my first concern is, how do I make my character, since I'm a character artist, how do I make the character to stand out if I want them to be the focus of attention, which is, again, usually my main concern, since I'm not a background artist whatsoever. So there are different ways to do that with values. So for example, there are some ways, and it also depends of the atmosphere that you want to set. So just to put an example, I'm going to work on grayscale first, so you can see what I'm talking about. I'm gonna make some squares around here, so it's easier for me to explain. So let's say if we want to make, and this applies to any composition really, if we want to make a character that is standing in let's say an open space, an open environment, and you want to set atmosphere of, okay, this character is the protagonist and they are about to begin an adventure, something like that. You want to give some interesting narrative. Okay, I'm gonna take a sip of coffee. There is a great way to communicate that if, for example, we have character here. I tend to, when it's about a prompt like this, like the one I'm mentioning, I like to set the camera below their waist, so we are looking from below, and the character will look greater to us. So, for example, they are in this cliff. Let me see what. Okay, it's clipping now. So they're in this cliff. They are looking to something that we are not just grasping yet. And as you can see, I always use a light color when I'm starting my value sketches, because especially since we are talking about an open environment, for how the atmosphere works in our planet, and the ozone and all the gases that are in the atmosphere, you will see that. Let me show you a picture. This will be easier if I show you. Okay, this kind of works. Okay. So, for example, in here, this is not the best example, but I'm gonna explain to you. Whenever we look at an environment, you have to keep in mind that because of how the atmosphere works and the distance in our perspective, the more further away an object is from us, the lighter it will look. And that's because of all, let's say, these layers of gases that are between us. So of course there is more amount of gas. I'm talking like in a very simple way, so it's easier to understand. If you ever have any questions about what I'm talking about, just let me know. But you can clearly see this, especially in my case, because I live in an area that has a lot of mountains, so it's really easy to see that. And how the light works on that way. So here we can distinguish. This is our first plane, which is composed by, a road, not a road, but I cannot grasp the word right now. So this is our darkest plane, and we have our characters here, people here. This is another plane. And then, this one is a little lighter, just a little bit lighter than this one, just because it's further from us, but not as much. And then you will see like there is this mountain, and this kind of until here or so. And then the further away the mountains are, the lighter they are. Of course, this is a sunny setting. And there is, the sun is this is probably midday. There's a lot of light, but you can see these ones are barely there. So, yeah, if we put this into grayscale, you will clearly see that, yeah, this area is like a dark gray, like this kind of, gonna simplify, it's kind of dark gray. We could separate this. Gonna make this in a new layer so you can see. You can see this. This is our main surface. This is even a bit lighter. This is another surface. And from here, just because there is a huge cliff that goes downwards, this is a great valley. So the distance is even greater. And then we can separate this. And if you're painting a piece that has a lot of elements and there's this great distance, and you don't have to, because there's something called focus of attention. So you don't need to, paint every rock on these mountains, because people are not going to look that way. You want to keep the attention to a certain point. These ones are, and these ones could be even this color. But yes, you can see the further away, the greater the distance, the lighter the value. So, for example, for composition about characters and such, you also need to have that in mind and use the psychology of value and color to use that to your own benefit, and what you want to make of the piece, what you want to communicate, what's happening in the illustration. That pays a lot of that. Those are going to be your greatest tools. So, as I was saying, getting back to our character who's standing here. Let's say they're standing here, and there are a few mountains, but I'm gonna make them pretty far away. I'm also creating, let's say, a gap here. I could put like a great mountain here too, just to embrace the character, so the piece is not as empty, and you have these strong structures, because triangles are the most stable forms for architecture and for a lot of things. So for example, anything that resembles a triangle in any illustration, depending on how you use it, also creates this kind of stability to your portrait. So for example, since this fella is in between mountains and they have this great mountain behind them, it seems like the piece is fuller, but it's also more stable in a way. So they are about to come into this great adventure that is ahead of them. So a good way to do that, and it's something that I really like to do. I want to make a piece that displays this as an example, is using sunsets. I love using sunsets. And I also, one second, not gonna use this. We can set like the sunset. Let me darken this a little bit. Give me a second. Make this a little lighter, just to separate planes a little better. So you can use the light, drop in something like this, ignoring that this person is going to have facial features and shadows and stuff. And I always use a little shadow for the sky, since the sky is not always the same color. But a second. Like this, you can darken it a bit, since it's not a sunset, the opposite, when the sun is coming out. So I used this example in a piece. Now I remember. I used this in, you know, in this cover of the comic. As you can see, the sun is probably, you can get the hint that, of course, mountains. I love mountains, because we're seeing these mountains and this surface. We already we know this person is, you know, not hiking. I don't know if that's a word. Just correct me if I'm wrong. And the light is making us pay more attention to this area, like the face because she's pale, and also the spits. But and also, of course, you don't need to, like, this part is not rendered at all. It's just some shapes and the faces of the mountains that are immediately getting hit by the sunlight, just like this one. But she's, you know, just to not create that kind of noise. In contrast with this metallic area, I kept the light here a little more shy. So for example, this would be an example of how would I set a piece like that if I wanted to display a character about to go into a great journey. If, let me see, let me check the chat. Okay, so regarding the color for this illustration, you can set complementary colors. For example, since this is a human person, colors would be, give me a second, we can set the colors on a warm palette. This would be maybe a little more reddish for these rocks. And let's say the gear, maybe a little bit of blue, so it's not so monochrome. Of course, this has to make a little sense. After all, depends of how how your character has any grasp on fashion, and of course, concept artwork on the character. But yeah, you can keep the background colder. Okay. And I would even heighten the saturation. So you have, I love a contrast between cold colors and warm colors because it tends to work pretty well. And I'm also, as you can see, a sucker for purple and orange in a lot of my illustration because they work so well for illustrations. And if you overuse the blue for shading or that kind of like to darken your colors, it's really easy to make the piece look really cold, as it was set on a really cool atmosphere. Let me see. But it really depends on my idea. This changes every time I'm working on a piece. And you have to consider there are several kinds of compositions. I personally love working with triangles and also the this grid and keeping the points of interest. Here, let me open a few of my works. So for example, this one and also this one. I'm not counting portraits because you don't have to worry as much for portraits since our brain will naturally feel attracted to look at faces. So for example here, give me a second. Why it's not? Okay. So for example here, dividing this in thirds, more or less. So as you can see, there's one focus of attention here, and then the other focus of attention is not centered, but pretty close to the center. And I'm also using the diagonal of the knife to, you know, invite the viewer to follow this narrative, because Val here is being the active character, so we are also looking at her from below because she has the power in this situation, and she's about to attack, you know, the open hand position. And this is the other passive character who is also ready to fight, but you know, he's behind and he's smaller, and we are looking at him from a more equal level because he's kind of he's kind of to our level because of how he's like more away from us. Even if we are, you know, like imagine like we are sitting here, we are below Val, but we are still at the same level as Aldrin. So we're she's handling the situation. In this piece, again, this is a portrait, so it's easier to handle, at least personally. I'm also kinda, not really, not perfectly, but I'm also using this grid because this is the focus of attention, the focus, and the portrait. And I compensated the difference of weight from her head and her figure with this other part of the background. Because if you did this, like if I had painted this completely flat, the piece would feel like really desolate and really empty. So that's why, for example, I place this here. It's not only about composition. It's about composition, but it's also compensated the weight on your piece, that everything is balanced in a way. Let me open any of my line work pieces since I have more of those. What could be a good example too? This one is already shown. This one. This is a good example of values. This is kind of the opposite example of a lighter background against darker values for our character. So since this character is more shady, you know, mean person, I'm not using a let's say a third grid, like a perfect third grid, but you can also see it's there. I'm you know, it's not proportional, but it's still there. And here I also set the camera below the character, because he's so, you know, so grand with his ego, very bossy and such. And this arm is not only body language of himself being inviting, it also opens a window for the other part of the piece that is balancing the focus of attention and is playing a second role on the composition as his form, his dragon form, which is also hiding in the shadows, because this character, for those who don't have context of this character, especially those who will be probably watching this on YouTube, this character is a shapeshifter. So while he's using these humanoid appearance, he rarely shows his true appearance, which is, you know, a monster dragon and such. So that's why I personally kept this look with darker values and a colder palette, because this whole piece, you know, the only warmth that is coming from this piece is from the pink light source that I set here, because he's not an inviting, I mean, he's inviting, but, you know, he's very mischievous. So there is no pure warm color from him. Everything about him is really cold, and that amplifies in this shape, because he's a monster, you know. And also he's in the shadows, and he's, you know, hiding from plain sight, and except for the eyes that glow a little bit and help adding more attention to his, you know, this whole piece. So that would be a way to address it. It's about the context of how do you want to what do you want to, you know, transmit, because also this piece is very, you know, it's very chill and calm. There's a lot of vertical and or horizontal elements. There are no diagonals, just a lens flare that I added for, you know, for flavor per se, and the focus. Those are the only diagonals that I placed in this piece, because diagonals tend to add tension to an artwork. So everything here is vertical and horizontal, even the tall neck here, which creates stability. That's why also the piece is so calm, not only because of the warmth, but also because of the stability that the piece is transmitting. Not like this one. This one, almost everything is creating diagonals. Because I also exaggerated the background here with these pillars. These pillars, being realistic. These pillars should look kind of like this, and maybe the roof a little bit like this. But if we were to take a photo out of this kind of this same structure, the pillars will look more like this. But if you exaggerate that just a little bit, well, or a little more, that also helps, you know, not only dragging attention but adding tension to an illustration. So that's why in this one there's diagonals everywhere, even in her pose. The only thing that is, let's say, straight and perpendicular to the bottom of the canvas is her face, and let's say the part of the neck, because she's very, very, very centered in compact. And also, well, Aldrin is more stable than her. He's also ready, but he's steady. He's like still. He's a kind of paralyzed. He's tense, but he's more in a paralyzed way that is displayed by the face. If he were to be, you know, with this kind of expression really serene and such, he wouldn't, you know, even with the same pose, it would transmit something different. He would not be playing as a secondary role, because then the piece, if I did that when I did this illustration, then it would look like she's acting out of impulse, maybe, or even more aggressive. But at least what I tried to transmit with this illustration is that he's reacting, he's surprised, and she's in control of this, because he's really, let's say, not over like too angry about it, but more like determined, which is, you know, the whole piece of the whole concept of this piece. So long story short, composition depends on the context and what you want to tell the people who are going to look at your piece, the narrative. Composition is your best friend, and also the use of lights for and colors for that narrative. When it's is it a welcoming situation? Is it not? Is it also a natural setting like this one, which makes the values softer, or is it does it have any artificial lights that are going to be striking more on your piece? So it depends. As I said, it depends. You have to study, you have to consider these factors and explore a little bit. I love doing thumbnails for my pieces, and I also have an example. Let me think, where is the folder? Okay, give me a second. Where is the folder? Okay, here. So, for example, for this illustration, I have the thumbnails here. Okay, first I did some thumbnails here, focusing in values first. I tend to jump immediately into colors, which sometimes is not the best thing to do. But when I'm not sure of how do I want to approach an illustration, I will always do a series of this. So to keep it short, this character that is portrayed here is a sad character, and also a very ancient character. So my way to study this was, okay, so this is still an important character for my original project, and I had several options. One of first I wanted to do like a calming but mysterious setting, and I was like, okay, so I still want to set them in an environment or in a background that is not entirely familiar to us, because this character has some kind of alien nature to them. So I wanted to make a piece that either displayed this kind of alien atmosphere, but also because of how this character is friendly, not friendly like a buddy, but it's not a foe. I still wanted the piece to be serene. So here I started with mountains, surprising nobody. Some ribs here of an unknown creature, just to add some kind of something's up. This is weird, like this mysterious narrative. There is some hidden context to this piece that we cannot really grasp. Some broken stones here, like what's the word? Like, yeah, a strange structure, a little bit religious maybe. And yeah, you can see these are some scribbles for clouds, the masses, those masses for the mountain formations, and this is one of the focus of attention, the secondary one, and the focus of attention that is the character. The setting is more calm as the one that I was firstly approaching, trying to approach. This one is also another example of, this character is doing something we don't know, but they are, doing magical stuff. And as you can see, the values here are very light, except for these bits, which are also rocks, and this is meant to be a steam. And I wanted to do this. The floor is snow, mostly snow. So it was easier for me to make that difference between the character who has a dark set of colors to them. So it was easier for me to put this character on a background that would make them pop out, stand out, even if the snow and the steam could collide. I was planning to, since the snow is white and it needs to be shaded, most of the time is shaded, should be shaded with a pale light turquoise, or more like a clear blue, rather than shading it with grays. Was planning to do the same with maybe a really pale green or even orange to make more contrast with these blue glows and such. Also, the background vaguely resembles an infinite symbol, because this character is really old, like really old. This other setting in the other hand was very dark space, kind of some kind of broken throne in which on which he's they them on there, in which they are sleeping, and that the contrast here would be from the background, which I was thinking of a dark purple with maybe some orange bits here with leaves or something like that, to the brightness of these bits. So it's just a really easy way to drag the attention to the character, because they have this really bright elements to them. And also I ended up picking this one, which is absolutely the opposite thing to what I was going to do in the first place, with the calmness and but I wanted to, then I decided to go with this thumbnail, because it's a key moment to their story, which involves a lot of destruction. And because personally I wanted to study clouds, or as I say, angry clouds, since there's this kind of vortex and there's a lot going on. As you can see, diagonal, more diagonals. Like, there's nothing completely straight or perpendicular in this illustration. Like, there's nothing. We still have a diagonal here, but because of how everything is mostly perpendicular and open, this piece is still not tense as this one. And then I proceeded with I'm gonna close this one. I proceeded with color studies, because when I decided to go with this thumbnail, I said, okay, this setting though, this background is their home world, which is absolutely alien to us. It's not set on Earth. It's not a place that we know. So instead of going with a natural palette, first I went with some kind of dawn palette here with the oranges and some blue. This blue is coming from the floor. That's why it's like so intense. But purple and orange as a dawn or a sunsetting. Then I went with a more purple tone to it. This would be actually a sunsetting, because it's darker on the upper side, and as the sun goes down, you see the light turns warmer because of how it's piercing through the atmosphere. So I was not convinced, because it looked really familiar to us. Then I went with a golden palette, because I was like, this is kind of an Atlantis narrative of things went south. But this was still like a very rich culture, so that's why I thought on gold and yellows, because it resembles richness. But then I was like, yeah, this is really like a lot. There is not as much richness to this palette as in these other ones. And if you I did this the hard way actually. Let me cover this. When I'm working in these thumbnails, I still want to check that the values aren't as affected, because colors can affect the values. I mean, they have their own values, but yeah, as you can see, they're mostly the same here. This one is has a little more contrast, so you will have to you want to be careful of that. And then I went with this one, which I liked more because of the green, because we rarely see green in the sky. I can say like some of the times we see any green on the sky is maybe because of the borealis. I don't remember the word right now, the name of it, but it's on really specific places, and it's not, you know, as common. Plus the aurora borealis, yeah, northern lights. Thank you. So I like this one better because of the contrast of you know, this green that is not as common with the pink here of some of the debris and such. And then since these colors work good with orange, I could use like I got a lot of contrast here while keeping some harmony with complementary colors, plus the blue. So that's kind of my process. It's a lot of things, but yeah, I hope it helps because it's, you know, it's a lot of information, and this is my way to do things. It's not, you know, a straight process, like a linear process. I usually go back and forth. Sometimes I struggle more, sometimes I struggle less, or I discard things because I'm not sure. It's not like I come out with an idea and boom, and make it. So, let me check next question. Just to not get super long on every question. Okay, the anatomy behind it. Can you formulate a more specific question? Sorry, it's just that so I know what you're talking about, because I imagine that is related to composition. I'll go with your son, Nicole, too. Yes, so often when I use reference to get ideas for poses, I find myself struggling with the anatomy. I copy what I see, meaning when I draw the reference, I copy the anatomy. Though when I ask for feedback, I am often told that the anatomy is incorrect. I was wondering how this kept happening, as I am literally redrawing the anatomy of a human being. Let me think. I mean, one thing that we have advantage of not against, but compared to 3D artist, is that 2D is more allowing with stylization and forcing perspectives and tricking the eye. Like we talked about this piece. 1 second. Although I will have to repeat here, but it's no issue. So for example, this piece we talked, and this applies also a lot to backgrounds. It's way easier to trick a background perspective on 2D than in 3D most of the time, because how 3D you have to... Well, it depends on your workflow, really. It depends. I'm not a 3D artist. It's not my main field of expertise or anything like that. I did some 3D art, and I can tell you it's way more comfortable, at least for me, to hit their perspective on 2D, just because there's ways to do it. So for example, we were talking the other day about this piece of how... I'm repeating this, I know you know this, but just for the rest. So we were talking the other day about this incredible piece, and how the anatomy here is not correct. I mean, it could, with some flexibility, but you know, because of the axis of this piece, we have the center of the body going this way because of the pegs. But then, when you want to... Because this is the focus of attention. The focus of attention is the eyes, which is emphasized by the arms, the tension of the hands. You know, we're going to also the third grid, you know. But when you are looking at the axis of this illustration, then you have to think, where does the neck begin? Because the neck should be like this, should be around here, because of how the neck is mostly centered. Should be here, right? More or less, because this is very scribbly, and how the triceps is connecting to it here, and it should be resting here. But it's not. The head is kind of levitating here, so we can place the focus of attention on top of the biceps. And I just lost track of the conversation. So I'm not a fan of copying the anatomy from a piece, from a model 100%, like aiming for that 100%. It's good to draw from models, so you can get that grasp of how the flesh works, because the flesh has weight. The flesh is not an inorganic thing, so it's subject to get deformed. If, for example, a person is sitting, the thighs will get wider, and such things. So when you are aiming for anatomy, and you don't have this, let's say this academic level, I'm more comfortable stylizing it a little bit, because my style is semi-realistic, let's say. So that's why a lot of people who copy things straight from a model, or even if you trace a model, even for study purposes, I'm not saying like trace for, you get me. That's why the model is going to look a little stiff. So, of course, it's good to do anatomy studies, but my best advice, instead of trying to memorize the amount of muscles that there is in the body to a medical level or such things, my best advice is try to understand how the body works. Because the brain, the thing is that the brain is a fucker. The brain is not your best friend when doing art, because the brain considers that art is not a crucial task for your survival. And because the brain gets really, really, really distracted and lies to you. So when you're drawing a model and you don't understand how the body works, how the muscles work and such, it's when, you know, when a kid draws a hand and the kid knows that the hand has 5 fingers, so they will draw something like this or something like this, because the kids know that the hand has 5 fingers, but they don't understand how the hand works, or how it's made in a more, let's say, engineer way. Sorry if this is not clear. I'm trying to, you know, put my thoughts into words. I love seeing the human body as a piece of work, like how like an animatronic per se, but better. Because the body is really interesting. Like when you understand how the joints work, how they form, how the muscles contract or expand, and the antagonists work, and you understand how they behave and how they need to be placed, then you can stylize that and simplify that to your style, and it will start getting, like, it will start looking less and less stiff. So by any means, I'm not saying you shouldn't use references. Please use references. They're there. Like it's I mean, yes, just use references anytime you need to. Even if you think you don't need to, just check references just in case, because they are crucial and they will save you a lot of time and distress. But sometimes you have to, especially when we're talking about 2D, instead of, okay, I'm gonna, you know, I'm looking at this reference, I'm going to translate this, I'm gonna, you know, get these shapes and put them into my canvas. I like to instead say, okay, so if a person is grabbing a glass, the biceps is working, especially on fit people. The biceps is, you know, shaped this way because it's working or it's not working, depending of how the pose is. And then I just simplify those shapes. For example, the biceps here and the triceps here. Instead, you know, just copying that from a model. Long story short, use references. Don't feel, not because you're using references, don't feel pressured or think that you have to copy the reference just as you're seeing it. Try to translate that into your style, and it's better trying to understand how the body works rather than drawing it exactly on a photographic level. I don't know if that's helping a little bit, because I have a good grasp on anatomy, but I don't draw. I don't aim for this academic style, like a hyper-realistic style, because the brain works on certain ways, and it's really easy to draw a body, and it's that we get this into this situation in which it's looking stiff. So sterilizing some bits of the anatomy really helps to break this feeling when we're copying from a reference. Does that help? Okay, next question. A second. I see you writing. Okay. So in terms of composition and everything you just showed us and explained it, this is related to the previous question. How would you convey the feeling of a character standing there and looking at the horizon, ready to go for an adventure, versus a character who's reclutantly going on a mission, or for example, a moment of respite? You mean somebody that doesn't want to go on an adventure, right? Okay, so instead of putting a lot of light, I would go to the opposite way, like go to a darker setting. So for example, since we have the mountains here being lighter than the main character, okay, never mind. Oh, okay, wrong layer, of course. So for that, I would go, considering we are working with the same one second. I'm gonna try to copy the same size of canvas so you can see how would I do it. Give me a second, I'm gonna get a little quiet. I'm gonna also consider that this is the same time of the day that the sun's coming out. Okay, I'm gonna merge all of these together so it's easy for me to handle. Okay, so my the first thumbnail that has come to mind is, instead of centering the character, you know, the big protagonist, being looked from below, I've set a whole different setting for this, in which body language is also important. Even if the character... This depends on how obvious your character is about showing their emotions. I went with a very obvious one. And considering they are alone as well, just because this character was alone too. If this character happened to be with more people, I would set them, you know, to the sides, talking to each other, and something like that, with the same light value on their faces. But for this one, first I'm going to explain them being alone and being obvious about their emotions, because they are alone. They don't have to fake it because there's nobody else around, versus the same setting with the same composition of this same character being more private about their emotions because there's more people around. So they are about to go on a journey. So they have some road, some second, let me change. Okay, there we go. So they have some walk to do in front of them. And the background is also taking a lot of space because since they are forced to go on an adventure, if you want to also communicate that sort of, I cannot do anything about it, I'm very small because I cannot fight the situation. You want to make the character smaller. You have to make them occupy less space in the piece because they're smaller than the situation. They cannot stop the situation from happening, so the character is going to feel smaller. So we have the main character here. They are looking to the ground, and second, because I'm losing control of my my brushes. And I imagine like a good way to portray that is when, for example, when kids have the backpack, and they are grabbing the, I don't know what's the name of this part that connects to the backpack and goes around the shoulders. Can you help me out? Yeah, the shoulder straps. So a good way to also communicate that is the person just holding to the straps, because they don't... Their hands are empty. If their hands are empty, is a good way to, you know, draw or paint the hands, just not hanging dead. I mean, you can still make the character be walking with their shoulders just down with this kind of really sad expression and such. But this is also a way to, you know, with the hand looking down, and you can also empathize with the maybe bother sad expression. And again, the background is taking most of the space. You can put some clouds here and there just to put something in the sky. And the pieces there's more darkness in this piece because the sun is behind this setting. You can put some light around here instead of them being bathed in it because it's midday and, you know, there's more hope. I would keep the character behind this mountains. So this is if they were alone and they were open about their emotions. But if you wanted to do a character who's in the same situation, and maybe even a character that is going to betray the party because they are planning something, or they don't want to go in this adventure because they don't like the party they are going with, and you want to communicate, okay, this person is not comfortable and they might be a traitor, or they might do something or not, like you want to hint anything like that. I'm gonna copy this figure, but no, I want to copy, just imagine we have a bunch of sad people right now, but we're getting there. Give me a second. So I'm gonna make this character being more open, you know, with the open arms, looking to somebody behind them. Even this person, not gonna move their body language a lot, but you can see with just making their head a little less hunched, they look more relaxed already. And gonna make this one being distracted with the views. If maybe their hands on their pockets. So this character, if they wanted to be more secretive about their intentions, you can make their back stay a little more straight because they don't want to look, they don't want to communicate their emotions. So we are going to move your head to be here. And you can make that, but maybe averting their gaze. Maybe more straight to the camera, or even maybe with some jealousy to the people who are in front of them, because these ones are keeping a conversation between them. This is just paying attention elsewhere, and this one is pissed because of the situation, but also with some jealousy towards these people because maybe they're feeling left out, not included, you know. On top of that, you can use like you can even exaggerate the setting by maybe gonna do this real but one second. Like you could even place these two people in another composition, but you could also increase the distance between these two characters and this one, and put this one on a middle term, or just to put more distance to show that if we were in this setting and this person would is here, if this person was here, you can imagine there's more people because it's more convenient to show more people and make it less obvious, you could place this person that we're talking about in the background with the same shady expression, like unbothered, pierced with jealousy, looking at for example these ones, or maybe looking at the character, at the main character. We would have to raise their chin a little bit, so it's looking to the main character. That's how I would work on that concept. So would you say by making the character smaller emphasize the task at hand? Yes. And you're using the environment as a more focal point than the actual character. I mean, this is still the focus of attention to us, because it's first a human figure. We tend to be more attracted to look at, unless the character, imagine, especially in these vertical pieces, it works really well for vertical pieces. If you want to display a tower. Second, why is it not clipping? If you want to display a tower, and this is a very popular kind of composition that I love a lot, and we have not so dark. We have a character who's still the protagonist and has a big task ahead. Maybe they are occupying. I'm gonna use the red because we were talking about the red at the beginning of the class. This is dragging a lot of attention. We know this is the protagonist of the piece just because red, and they are going just because of how the value here is so pale. It could be even paler. Could be even imagine there is even fog here. Like it's a foggy kind of beacon or something like that. You can even empathize it with the weather. I lost track. We know they have to probably do a long journey towards this place. But if we divided this in thirds, they are not in any focal point. But because it's red, we're going to get just to pay more attention. Let me see, because I'm losing track. 1 second. Yes. So yes, making the character smaller emphasizes either the background, like if you want to give a perspective of how big something in the background is, it's really a good tool is to draw maybe a person and a dog here, so you can say, okay, holy, this is a big tower, or for example, there is a monster here, dragon, let's say, who is the dragon is holding onto this tower, and then you say, okay, so if the dragon is this size, this person is really tiny compared to this whole dragon. So you have to use balance and empathize in certain things, like the background. If they have a another important thing, if they have a trouble ahead. This also depends on your public, because since people here, at least most of us that I know, are Western. Sorry, we read things from left to right. So we are immediately reading that this person is beginning, it's starting a trouble. But if a person from any country who has a tradition from reading from right to left, these people would be returning from a travel because they read in this direction. So they are returning from somewhere. They're getting maybe back home. So you have to keep that in mind, especially if it's a commercial work and your client has a different culture. But yeah, nowadays most things are adapted to the Western point of view. That would be also another important thing to have in mind. Okay, next question is, others can probably answer as well, but for somebody who hasn't drawn anything really since mandatory art class in grade school, where would you suggest to start in? Okay, so the most important thing that I consider that is important in like what's really important to have a good fundament of in art is volumes. Like having because of how when we start drawing we limit ourselves to shape language and lines and the outer lines of things. But because of how we're looking, for example, we see an object, we see a pyramid or a mountain, and the first drawings we are going to do about mountains is going to probably look something like this on top of the horizon, you know. So volumes are really key for having a decent base on art, in my opinion. So how do I phrase this? We know things are 3D, but because of how brain likes to go on a riot when it's about something that it doesn't consider that is a survival skill, it will save and simplify, and it will save energy and invest as less energy as possible. That's why we simplify things, because it's also to communicate better, and we will draw a house like this. So the 3D things that we are seeing in real life and we are perceiving in real life, when we are starting to learn how to draw and paint, we will translate that into the most flat things, like the flattest things ever. So volumes, studying volumes and how to shade and values and grayscales, it's a good way to start. And speaking of dead nature pieces, as the ones I mentioned before, yes, they can be incredibly boring and repetitive, but one of the goals of studying dead nature pieces is learning how to train our skill of, okay, I'm seeing an apple, I see, this kind of, an apple, and, maybe a banana and grapes here, and we are seeing this. How to translate the object that we're seeing into a piece, and being as loyal to the volumes, not only the colors, but also the volumes as possible. So that's a good way to start. I would start with volumes, and if you need to focus on grayscales by, for example, studying sculptures, which is also another exercise that is really good for volumes, because the sculptures made of marble, marble, well, you get me, of white stone. Since they don't have these many elements that are distracting, and they have no colors, it's easier to get less distracted. So at least this is what this was my way of starting doing art, like on a serious way. When I decided to study art, we did a lot of nature pieces and studies of sculptures and repetition. You have to learn how to copy first, in terms of developing a style as well, but also to understand how other people paint or how other people draw. If you want to learn how to draw certain things, or I'm not saying about, you need to copy somebody else's style once you have this base grasp on things, but it's good to learn how to copy things, especially date nature and things that are of, let's say, public domain, to teach the brain that I know this is a mountain, this is a group of mountains, and I know this is a house, but I need to communicate this better. So please stop saving energy on that. Let's work on this a little better. And also flipping the canvas, that's really important. I explained this on my previous lesson of how flipping how the brain works, and because of how it does that, sorry for notification, and because of how it does this kind of active riot on us. When you're staring at something for a long time, the brain will stop paying attention and will go with this is a hand. It will start looking like seeing the hand, and will tell you a hand has 5 fingers. Draw 5 fingers. I don't care about the details. I'm just going to cancel your skill too. I'm going to cancel your skill and your craft ability, or whatever however you want to call it, and you will stop seeing any mistakes. So flipping the canvas generates a new image in your brain, because it's also very dumb. So if you're working on digital art, please flip the canvas whenever you need it, especially if you're doing studies. Personally, when I do studies, I don't like to flip the canvas as much, just because I want to force my brain to pay more attention. You don't have to overwork yourself, especially if you're starting, but it will make you have put a little more effort. Just everybody's pace is different, and if you need to worry and if you need to study one thing at a time, just don't feel bad, because when I do, as I said in the other session, when I do studies, I don't necessarily aim for photographic perfection. Like, I want to get this as accurate as possible. I want to do this photorealistic study. I can do a study of the nature, and maybe I don't care that my fruits are going to look exactly as the photo or that nature I'm copying from. But maybe I want to worry more about the values or the colors, or how I'm perceiving the colors. So you don't have to aim for everything at once. And books, resources. Some of the books that are incredibly good and really friendly. Any book made by James Gurney. I'm gonna write this in the canvas. So James Gurney has a lot of books about art, but especially the books called Light and Color are really good, because they are not pricey books, and they are really friendly, because in terms of it's like going to an art class, like assisting an art class by, you know, a master of it, because he has a great skill on art in light and color. Yeah, but it also the books give you explanations about how the concept of light and, you know, the atmosphere, these things we've been talking about, and how to pay attention to certain things. So any book by James Gurney, especially light and color series, is really good, and it's a must in my opinion. And a lot of artists will tell you that, because they're really good, and yeah, the explanations are really good. And also some books for anatomy that aren't pricey, and they're really good, and they are examples of art studies, which you can use as references, or not anatomical references like on a medical scientific level, but they're also good examples of how this person does live studies. It's more an artistic approach rather than anatomy accuracy, although it's a really good level. It's a really good level of anatomy accuracy. It's the series, I might be wrong because I'm reading, like, my book is in Spanish. Artistic Anatomy by Michelle Lauricella. I'm going to write that down on screen too. Okay, sorry, I'm gonna use capital letters instead. So these books are very affordable. There are a couple of them, and there is some series of these books. But what is also good is that Michelle Lauricella has one of the very few books that explains and features studies of fat people and how the fat distributes in the body, in the difference. I think I don't have that book yet, but yeah, the fat distribution in body in the is different from assigned female at birth people and assigned male at birth people. So it's the body distribution is different. So it's always good to have one of those at hand. And Michelle Lauricella has a lot of, you know, it's their books are really good. Just to say that, if you want a book that is more on a scientific perspective, in terms of more like an index, I have 8 Atlas of Human Anatomy for the Artist by Stephen Rogers Peck. This one is a little bit more pricey, so depending on your area, because in my case, the books can get a little pricier. Anatomy for Sculpture. One second. Let me Google that. Okay, I don't have this book yet, but this book, I've heard really good things about this book because it features not only 3D models, but real life models with this overdrawn, I don't know what to call that, but you know, like the muscles are overdrawn, but also separated with colors. So you can see the different groups of muscles better. And I also have another book that is Stonehouse Anatomy by I'm going to probably murder the name, so sorry for my pronunciation. Jung Hyun Seok is a Korean artist. The bad thing about this book is that it's not only really pricey, but there are some things in the book that are can get really offensive in terms of, you know, sometimes there are, like, the explanations are really good. I still haven't read through the entirety of the book, and it's a good book, but it would be better if it didn't have certain drawings of, like, say, black people and such. There's kind of the blackface issue sometimes in the book. So that's it. Unfortunately, that's the issue with the book, and I'm not really comfortable by recommending it. So any option, I would aim first for James Gurney as a must, Michelle Laurizella for anatomy artistic references and fat people references, and Stephen Rogers Peck for if you want a book that is an anatomy index, if you want to memorize it. Although it's not the most useful book that I have. I would aim maybe for Anatomy for a Sculpture first, rather than an Atlas of the Anatomy for the Artist by Stephen Rogers, in my opinion. So that would be, long story short, the books I would aim for if you don't have the habit of drawing, and focusing on volumes first and work in your brain, not being on a riot with, you know, the energy it invests on drawing. And creating a habit, because it's good. It's good to, habits are good, habits are good. Hope that helps. Okay, more questions, people? Do you have... Yeah, okay, I see Nicole writing. Anatomy. You could show how you showed to me on stream how the general anatomy works, like where the body's middle, etc. Okay, yeah, that's a good suggestion. So, okay, general proportions of the human body, and things to have in mind, like little tricks that I use for reference. Talking about my style, because I like my style is stylized, semi-realistic. It's not an like academic level. So let me. This is going to be pretty rough, but it's going to be an example of how I see the human anatomy, and yeah, I said some tips for it. Okay. So there's a lot of, you know, especially in books of how to draw anime. Yeah. That kind of books that will tell you a person's height is 8 times their head size for a tall person, and these many heads for a kid, and you know, that kind of shit. I don't like that at all. Like, of course it has to, you know, it's good to compare certain parts of the body between each other to get a better grasp of proportions. But measuring a person's height by the level of heads is, I mean, it's not impossible, but it's not going to be your biggest friend, especially when perspectives are involved and for shortenings and such. So it's not going to be the best tool to have in mind. So how do I present a person, let's say standing, just a standing? Okay, it's been a while since I did this kind of exercise, so bear with me. I might go back and forth. So what I do when I want to, let's say, make a standing composition and explaining to somebody, how do I do this? How do I make a person look proportional? First I start with, okay, this is our total height. And this is really useful if you are doing a live study and you have the paper in front of you. It's not a canvas that you expand to the infinite, or to your PC specs if you're on digital. So for example, if you were doing a live study and you have the paper, which is this big, and you know you are measuring the proportions of the model, and you say, okay, so I want to go from this to this, and I want to do this person this tall because I know the proportions are a certain way, and I don't want to cut their feet out of the piece, you know, that, because that's a really common issue. You have to, you know, first sculpt when you're drawing a live model. It's always better to measure the angles and the outer lines. Like when somebody is working on a sculpture, it's not impossible, but they're not going to sculpt the face and the rest of the rock is just like this, you know. They're probably the easiest ways to approach that is to measure the angles and then sculpt and shape, and spending more time on details. But when you're sure that you're doing the right proportions and elements of the illustration and such, and the sculpture, so for proportions, how do I measure the work? How the body? Sorry, starting to English. So I explained to Nicole the other day how to make the proportions on the body, and I asked her, where do you think the exact center of the body, like the middle half of the body, like where's the line? Where's the line that goes exactly, that cuts the middle half of the body? And most people will say, well, it might be the belly button or the hips, you know? Yes, to the hips is yes and no. The exact center of the body is the I cannot remember the name of the bone, but basically the bone of the crotch. Sorry to say it like that, but it's just that bone that is the pelvic bone. Thank you. And this is actually interesting because in female presenting care, like in I'm gonna change my speech in a second. For, let's say, we're about to get into cisgender speech, so it's easier to explain. So for females, I hate that word. Uh, so let's say for women, cis women, the bone is just like the center is just below, you know, the genitals, and for men, their genitals are hanging from that bone. So I'm gonna show you in just a second. So we have the center here, and if I draw a person, this is going to be extremely scribbly. Yes, I hate the word females. For people, it's like really dehumanizing. Yes, okay, I'm gonna, give me a second so I can figure this out. Again, my style is very... I'm doing this the wrong way. See? I need to make a scribble first. And then fix my mistakes. So I understand my brain, but since I tend to, I'm losing the practice of building from, you know, maths. I'm gonna explain to you this horrible scribble in a second. Okay, so we have our person here. More or less. More or less. So top part, head, lower part will be the ankle, because they're looking at us like this, so there is a foreshortening here for the feet, but we're not paying attention to that. Let's consider that the feet are, you know, this is an orthographic perspective. There's no, like, every point is in the every part is at the same distance to us. So let me make sure that I'm, because there's something here bugging me. Something I do on digital is sometimes I create a square or a rectangle here. Okay, so this is the total length of the legs that I'm drawing. So is this person proportional? It's lacking a little bit of height on the upper part of the body. So now it looks a little better already. But so we have our person standing here, and the pelvic bone is here. For women, cis women, we would have the hips like this, and, you know, imagine the panties doing something like this. For men, their genitals would be hanging from it, but having our total height and the center, we can easily measure if a person is proportional by paying attention to the pelvic bone, because that's the most important, that's one of the most important parts of the body if we want to be loyal to proportions. Of course, some people have different proportions in terms of, okay, so this person has long legs, or, you know, wider shoulders, or whatever. We are talking about, let's say the perfect proportions, but it's easier to try and to aim for that first, and then when we are more comfortable with, we know, like we have a bigger knowledge of human anatomy, we can start messing around with proportions just a little bit, especially if our style becomes more and more stylized and we lean to exaggeration. But as I say, and a lot of people say you must know the rules to break them, because it's going to be the, you know, you need to understand the body language and the anatomy and such, so you can learn how to exaggerate certain things and make them look good. Sorry, so excuse me. Pelvic bone, the most important part of the body for proportions. When it's about the legs, as you can see, these quarters are for the knees, and I would say the ankle, since it's the standing point here, because, you know, if somebody has their leg, for example a ballerina, and they are arching their toes like this, of course the proportions are not going to be the same, because of this joint is making the leg look longer, because the distance is bigger compared to this. So I would say standing point, the ankle, so the distance between the pelvic bone and the knee to the base of the ankle should be also proportional, even if the legs are, even if it's a character with really long legs. I tend to shorten this area a little bit, and that's something I have to fix and mess around when I'm drawing, because for some reason I naturally tend to draw them a little short, and then I have to, you know, cut the leg and, you know, move it around. But in traditional that's not possible. You have to overdraw everything. And for the torso, I tend to divide it in 3 pieces. Well, I'd say four quarters. I know it's a lot of numbers right now. It can be messy, but yeah, if we are paying attention to this half, once we are sure that these and these are the same, I want to say distance, but it's not, like they're the same size, then we can move to, okay, so to get a better grasp of anatomy, I can divide these in four chunks. One is for the head, one is for, let's say, the pecs, more or less, the nipples if you want to, for a man, and the other one is for the belly button. So this is very simplified, but I hope it gives a better grasp of proportions in a simplified way. Another important thing, the arms, sure, the arms. Okay. I tend to measure the arms in a similar way to the legs. So I know if we are standing in a natural position, with your shoulders relaxed, but the spine not relaxed, like hunched, because we have, especially now, we have a more hunched position as for staying relaxed. I'm talking about, you know, your spine is relaxed but still straight, and your shoulders are relaxed. This is very important because it's really easy to raise your shoulders a little bit. If you're just a little tense, it's really easy to move the collarbones and the shoulder blades. Sorry. So in a natural relaxing pose, the elbows are going to be aligned with the belly button. And another reference for that is that the rib cage ends as well, more or less, at the same height. And the bone, the hips, there's a tiny space here, but the hips are almost at, like, in these 3 points are usually related to each other on a relaxed position. So you can measure this up, you know, belly button, elbow, and these two bones. And the wrist tends to be also, let's say, aligned with the pelvic bone. If you want to, you can also think of trouser pockets, because they tend to be at this height too, because the hand is hanging at both sides of a point that is called, let me think, because I remember the name in Spanish. Trocánter mayor del fémur is it's the name. But oh, what's the word? Let me consult this on translator. Okay, so yeah, talking about proportions. Shoulder, elbow aligned to the waist, the center of the waist and belly button, and wrist aligned more or less most of the times to the pelvic bone, and then the hand is hanging from there. So it's just a little below for cis men, a little below from the genital area, and not halfway. Not depends of the proportion, not halfway through the thigh, but it's pretty close still. Depends on how long your legs are, but you can see, like, this is a good way to look at it. And yeah, because pockets tend to be on this side, so we can bend. Gonna try it in the other way. We can bend the arm like this. So if you want to draw a character who has an arm raised like this, and especially if it's still in front of us, I like to make some radius, like the needles, not the needles, like the parts of a clock. What's the word? I want to say needles, but it's not needles. Let me translate that. Oh, clock's needles. Okay, so I was right. So doing this kind of radius to measure the distance is also helpful to know how much the arm expands to a side and how long does it look. For example, I'm gonna show you I could have written that. Okay, so we have oh, 1 second. This sketch by Leonardo da Vinci. As you can see, like the elbows are also doing this kind of circle, because this person is opening their chest as well. But yeah, you can see the lines here and how there's some kind of not exactly a perfect circle, but you can see this is not like I hope you're getting me, because right now my English is failing me. I apologize. But yeah, like there's some kind of circle structure that you can also pay attention to when trying to move the limbs around. Especially if you want to move this limb sideways or open it sideways. What else? It will be similar for cis women. If you want to stylize a little bit, you can simply make the waist a little thinner. And I like to draw these pouches here because fat is also distributed here usually. But yeah, this is a really brief explanation about proportions and how I measure them. There's also these tricks of, you know, the size of the forearm is the same size of your character's feet. I'm not shitting you, it's the same. If you ever, even if you're not wearing shoes right now and you're in a comfortable place, you can put your feet, one of your foot against your forearm, and if it's not the same size from wrist to elbow, it's going to be really close. So for reference, I like to pay attention to, okay, so is this character's feet proportional? I did English. Sorry. I did this recently with this character. And I measured, because at first the feet were a little small, so I said, okay, is this distance similar to this distance? So, gonna copy this, move it here. So as you can see, it's kind of the same size, and because of how proportions work, this is also the same size. So this is how I usually work. It's just about comparing proportions with the most random things sometimes. If you know that, okay, so one foot on a character is going to be the same size as their forearm. That means it's the same size as their arm. Another trick. What was another trick? Oh, sure. Hands. If we're talking about regular proportions, if you cover your face with your hands, you will, like, you understand that each hand covers half of your face. So that's also how I make sure that the hands that I'm drawing are proportional. So let me see. Considering that this hand is relaxed, so imagine that the hand is more or less this big. If it's still relaxed, but you know, not in this perspective. So you would see that because the forehead ends here. I should have chosen another piece because this is a robot, but I mean, there's still, like, the features are there. And speaking about face features, the eyes are, this is also interesting because if you look at somebody's face, you will think usually that the middle half of the skull might not be the eyes. Like, maybe, you know, now the half of the like the vertical half of the skull is the nose, but it's actually the eyes. The eyes are placed here, and then we have the nose and the mouth. This kind of works by a law of thirds too, but I can get to that another day, that I have something else prepared. And the forehead will mostly end here. What we are seeing here, if we look at somebody's profile, I think the nose is here and the mouth is here. What we are looking here is the sculpt that goes a little upwards. And this is what, on top of that, there is the hair, which is really distracting for the brain. So that's why your brain tells you, no, the half of the face of the skull is the nose. Because the hair, and depending on the style, it takes a lot of space and it's really distracting. So you may want to pay attention to this subtle angle of the skull here and understand that you're going to be distracted by this. Just pay attention to making your eyes the point of, you know, the perfect half is and I'm gonna say something really weird, is the equivalent of the pelvic bone. Okay, so that's your main reference. That's going to be your biggest concern when trying to make the proportions, until you get, you know, more natural with the sketching people's faces and such. And if you need to, just compare parts of the body that you know they are the same size, just as feet with forearms, and for example legs. I tend to, when I was having more struggles with anatomy, I tended to think about, okay, so if a person is sitting on the ground and they are hugging their knees, like imagine these are the arms. Okay, I'm gonna do this pretty scribble. Okay, so imagine this is a person hugging their knees and you see the arms wrapping around. You will see that the shoulders are barely a little bit, there's not much distance from the knees to the shoulders. Even if that person is mostly going to be, you know, their back is going to be bent, like folding this way, not folding, sorry, English. But yeah, that person's spine is going to be arched this way, and you will see that legs are going to be mostly reaching here. So you want to keep a little bit, you will want to pay attention to that depending on your character's pose, those kind of details. Just imagine, and if you need to take selfies of yourself, or again, look at references if needed, compare things, ask yourself, okay, so if this person is standing there, I remember that the feet is this size, the arm should be this size, depending on your perspective, even like, okay, does this make sense? Are the proportions right? If I'm stylizing, if I'm exaggerating certain parts of the anatomy, does it still make sense? That kind of thing. Hope it helps. Because it's just, you know, a very decaffeinated anatomy class without getting, you know, very very deep into detail of this specific muscle does this and behaves like this, and if you're, you know, sitting, it gets deformed in this way because of your own weight, because gravity, etc. Yes, I love finding, you know, when I was told that one of my foot was the same size of my forearm, I was like, nah, no way, my feet are going to be smaller than that, but no, it's the same size. It's the same size, and it's just bamboozling. If you think about it, like, okay, so the body can be seen as, that's why I was talking before about, don't think about the body and anatomy as things that you are already familiar with. Try to analyze it in a way that makes sense, like simplify anatomy into simpler shapes if it helps, and try to understand how everything relates to the rest of the parts of the body in terms of when we are speaking about proportions. Like, okay, what does make sense, how it makes sense, how it doesn't make sense, how does it work? Because that's going to, I'm going to say, open your mind and allow you to absorb knowledge better, rather than, I want this hand to look super photographic, you know. That's not going to help. It's better to understand the structure first, at least for me, because I have a very logical way to think and to understand things. Once I understand how something works, it's easier for me personally to translate that and remember that in the future. About the face, ear placement. Okay, okay, ear placement. That is something that I was struggling with. Let me see, 1 second. Because I had, give me a second. I had kind of a hard time until recently. I don't think I'll be the best at explaining why ears are placed in a certain place. I just, let's say that I vibe with what does look good. I cannot give any explanation like with a foot is going to be the same length as your forearm. I don't have like an example such as that one for ears. But let me see if I can think about something. Okay, 1 second. I threw book away. Oh no. Oh no. So when I sketch a school, for example, for profiles, because we're not going to get into a complicated angles yet. Start with a circle because I don't know. Primal instinct circles when sketching. I don't know. I don't always know structure things. But I simplify the school. a lot, because I know the forehead does this angle, the skull, this I had the word, the scalp goes in this direction, the jaw also goes to this direction, and I know that the bones of the teeth and the mouth are pointing a little bit. This depends on the structure of a person's face, because if anything, proportions are usually pretty, let's say, much the same in our species, but face features, not much. That's when our genetics get crazy, really. So this might depend. I usually draw my characters with this kind of angle for the forehead, and the mouth area slightly popping more. But again, there are people who have a more of a straight face, and their forehead is just a little I don't know the name of this word, but it's not so, let's say, behind. So about the ear placement, when I have the structure of the outer shape of the skull, I tend to just not make a pure half for the skull, but it's kind of half of the skull. And that's where I place the ears. I cut a little bit here because of how the skull goes this way to the neck. But yeah, you want the ear to start in this line, and remember that it connects to the jaw, because you have the cheekbone here, we have the temples, the temples here ish, again middle, the eyes are here. Let's say these are the eye sockets. This is the forehead, the bone of the nose, and then the teethsies. I'm gonna make a fang there. And then we have the chin and the bone. So we have, again, the joint of the jaw. Here are the molars, and there is a little room here for the cheek. So yeah, the ear hole is around this area, and the ear is just on top of it. It's covering it. So we can just put the rest of the muscles. On top of all this information, once we understand how the skull forms. And that's how I structure a skull, just very briefly. Again, it depends on other face features. This is really Western. For Black people, this angle tends to get a little more like the angle tends to get smaller for Black people. Just a little bit, don't over exaggerate it, because we can fall into let's say nasty, what's the word, stereotypes. But let's see. considering just, you know, representative, but not necessarily face features for Black people. You can exaggerate this even a little more. And the nostrils are also wider because their skulls are also different, and the nose socket here, I don't know what's the name of it, is different. I'm going to show you something. This is a good resource that I accidentally found out one day. Because you know the most common school example that is shown everywhere is from, if I'm not mistaken, most of the drawings and examples of how to just explain how a skeleton works and such, those are 90% of the time from white men from Europe, and I'm going to show you why. Especially for the school, since we are talking about genetics and how it affects how we have this really rich genetic code that works especially on faces. That's where it acts more on a, let's say, on a physical appearance. Okay, so I have these. One second. I have this website here, and you know, this is the kind of a school that is more similar to us. This is female European, but you can see there's also, like, there's already different. These are not real, but they are based on people who donated to science or who were subjects of study in medicine. So they are not real, but let's say that they are the closest thing to a real, you know, school that we can get. So you can see, depending on the ethnicity, some features are different. So for example, for female European, it's just say the standard school that we are shown everywhere, and male African features like a more angular jaw angles here, a wider skull too compared to female, and also the nostrils are going to have a bigger distance between each other just because the holes here are way wider. So if we were to draw, let me see if I can amplify, like zoom in. Okay, website is running a little slow. So if we were to draw a character on top of, one second, on top of this photo, just because we are trying to understand the face features. Also remember, the eye is this size, but there is, if I'm not mistaken, the eye is surrounded by 5 muscles that are responsible of the movement of the eye. And the eyelids, of course. Although I'm not sure if those count. Can you imagine the eyebrows just on top of this bone? There's barely any flesh between the eyebrows and these edge. That's why it's so easy to, you know, break your eyebrow and bleed from it, because there's nothing there. There's just an edge. So if you get punched or if you fall on against, if you hit your eyebrow with something, it's really easy to break the skin because there's this edge just beneath it. And for the nose, let me lower the opacity here. Have the lower eyelids here and the eyelids. I'm doing the eyes a little small, but just bear with me. So the nostrils, depending on the structure of the nostrils and the nose, but it would do something like this. Would be something like this because the bone is not only, like the skin is not only covering this part of the arc of the nose, which is wider, but also because the nose tends to get, it's not entirely straight. And there's also let's say, as I talked about this a long time ago on Twitter, the tweet got kind of popular because I was talking about how most of the studies, unfortunately most of the studies we have about human anatomy are really based on white supremacism, and I'm going to explain you why. The fact that this angle thing was studied, I was told by my anatomy teacher. So we have let me show you. Was Greek sculptures, yeah. Let me see. Okay, so for example, when you look at Greek sculptures, one feature that is really common on this kind of art is that the noses are really, they come like they fall really straight from the forehead, and most people say, okay, but that's maybe an artistic choice that was popular during those years and such. But no, I mean, yes, but it has its explanation. So these people understood that the bigger this angle is from the nose and the mouth, the more intelligent a creature tends to be. So us humans have a really wide angle compared to a horse or a dog, which has a really, small angle. So they said, gods are more intelligent than us. How do we represent that? So they made this angle as flat as possible. Phrenology. I don't know what that is. Let me Google that. Oh, yes. Kind of. I don't know if it's the same, like the exact field, but I was told by my anatomy teacher that this was the source of it. So they said, gods are better than us. They're more intelligent than us. How do we represent that on sculptures and art? And they said, okay, so if we have this angle on our faces, gods need a more bigger angle for the nose and the structure of their faces. So that's why, that's the reason behind these kind of bridge, the nose bridge, just like immediately connected to the forehead. And apparently there were some fucking nasty men who were like, okay, so we are very racist. How do we get scientific evidence of that black people are less intelligent than us white men? So that's why they paid attention and they started doing these anatomical studies, because they saw that black people have sometimes this structure, and they assumed like, okay, so it's because of that. How do we prove that? So that's kind of a nasty historical curiosity that I absolutely hate, and I always mention when I'm speaking about school structures, because unfortunately that has to be addressed. So yeah, those are some kind of that's at least how at least I structure and I think about the structure of the school, depending on the ethnicity and such. Whenever I want to design a character, it's also really common that some characters, especially if they're white, or they have a white skin tone, and I'm one second, and I'm addressing referencing Marza from Destiny, because I did an art study once out of her. Not an art study, but I had to draw her once, and I saw it. I am not saying this was intentional, but it can be a way of reading this character. I'm not finding any references right now, but she has this kind of forehead and nose and tiny face, but she has also this angle of the face. Anywho, this could be a coincidence and such, but some characters, like concept artists, sometimes use this kind of like the Greek sculptures style to represent to design a character that is meant to be, godlike, or it has like this weird vibe to them. Yeah. I started talking about ear placement, and I just disclosed a lot of information. So yeah, I hope that helps. It's also, I forgot to mention that ears tend to have this angle too. They're not like this, like this, like straight. They tend to have an angle too, and there's a little distance between the half of the eye and the ear. Sometimes it is not, but I place it between the ear and the half of the eye, and let's say the half of the mouth, because of the law of thirds here, like 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. So one is for the forehead and the half of the eye. One is for the nose, depending on how long or short it is, and the third is for the mouth and the chin. What time is it? Check. Do you want me to give you feedback for the video? Is it okay if you're not comfortable with it? Okay. So Nicole has just shared this in the Discord. it's there, but we have to be mindful of a couple things. It's not bad. It's not bad, but we need to pay more, be a bit more careful with the proportions that we're talking about. So I see that you have the angle. Okay, that is good, but you need to be careful with okay, let me see 1 second. Okay, school is usually a little bigger for brain size. 1 second. Okay, you got this, but again, the ear has this angle. And also the main thing that I see here. Okay, the eyes are good. I like the ear. Oh, sorry, I'm obsessed with ears apparently. The eyebrow doesn't come this far. The eyebrow, since we are looking at it from a side, it tends to come this way, like just here, because this is popping more to the front than the eye, which is, let's say, digged inside the skull. So we have here room for part of the muscles here and the eyelids. So that's why the eyebrow is also, you know, it's not going to come this far. Also cheek. Okay, the nose, because of how the cheekbones are also, let's say, closer to the viewer, the nose needs to. This is speaking about, you know, regular proportions. So you want to keep the nostrils a little bit aligned with the cheek. Run there, more or less. And okay, this can be. This is a little bit more subject to the person's proportions and such. You can move this around. The mouth, I think the mouth here is a little small. But yeah, it's just little things that we have to get familiar with. Also the fact that these men have the bone of the forehead doing something like this. Just a little bit. While these women have their forehead bone is, let's say, softer and a little curvier. Usually, I'm speaking about, you know, general terms again. Also because of the face structure and the muscles, but mainly these men tend to have this structure. I would even make, yeah, the ear here is even a little small. Something like that. Something like that. And for the front, okay, I tend to do these lines for the forehead. This is not the whole forehead, but it's kind of this angular part of the eyebrows. Tend to divide it here. So these lines help me get a better perspective of how I know this part of the forehead is already going that way. It's like not perpendicular to me. This part of the forehead is facing me, but these parts are not. They're not facing me. They're going this way. It's kind of this part of the forehead ish. Okay, as you can see here, this is not the half of the. Sorry. This is not the half, it's almost there, but it's not exactly the half of the skull. So this part of the face is a little longer than it should. So how to fix that? Just by giving more brain room to this person, more space to think about things. I tend to draw these lines because they help me structure things. You know, the cheekbones come this way, and I know the jaw or something like this, depending on the person. So it's just not, it's not a big issue here. You just need to keep in mind this is the half part. This distance should be the same distance as this one, as accurate as possible if it's a, you know, total frontal angle, because of how we're looking at this. And the ears, more or less there. They're not exactly the same as in this other drawing, but here's that. I'm gonna share with you in the channel. And I'm going to also share with you this one first. So I hope this was helpful to all of you. Thank you for listening to me and asking me questions. I hope you learned something today. And if you have more questions or you want more feedback from me, you can tag me on the feedback channel anytime.